He went out unlooping the reins, but instead came back with an Apache woman in his arms. The morning began before the sun had fully risen. A pale gray light spread slowly across the wide stretch of land, touching the tops of fences, the edges of the barn roof, and the dusty path that ran between the buildings. The ranch sat quiet in that early hour, as if it were still half asleep. A thin breeze moved across the open fields and carried the dry scent of grass and earth. Inside the bunkhouse, most of the workers were still resting, but Daniel was already awake. Daniel was a man of routine. He had lived and worked on the ranch long enough that his body seemed to know the time without needing a clock. Every morning he rose before the others, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside to check the horses. It was work he understood and trusted. Horses needed care, and the land needed attention. There was comfort in knowing what each day would bring. That morning he expected nothing different. He stepped out into the cool air and paused for a moment on the wooden porch. The sky above him was clear, fading from dark blue to soft orange near the horizon. A few birds called in the distance, and somewhere near the far fence a horse shifted and stamped its hoof. Daniel took a deep breath and began walking toward the stables. His steps were steady and his thoughts were simple. Feed the horses, check the water troughs, and get ready for the long day ahead. When he reached the stable, he noticed one of the horses moving more than usual. The animal tossed its head and pulled slightly at the reins tied to the post. It was not frightened, just restless. Daniel moved closer, speaking in a low, calm voice. He placed a hand gently on the horse's neck, letting it feel his presence. The horse settled a little, but still seemed uneasy. Bear. Daniel frowned slightly. Horses often sense things before people did. Still, he saw no clear reason for concern. He began to unloop the reins, working slowly so as not to startle the animal. The leather felt cool and worn in his hands. He had done this task countless times, but yet, as he worked, he noticed the horse's ears flicking toward the open land beyond the corral. Its attention was fixed on something out there, something Daniel could not yet see. He finished unlooping the reins and stepped back, scanning the horizon. At first, there was nothing unusual. The land stretched wide and empty, broken only by low bushes and scattered rocks. The light was growing stronger, revealing more detail with each passing minute. Daniel turned to check the other horses, but the restless one pulled gently forward, as if urging him to look again. He followed its line of sight toward a shallow dip in the land beyond the fence. There, in the dusty ground, he noticed faint marks. They were tracks. Not the tracks of cattle or horses, but the lighter, uneven prints of someone walking. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to the fence. The tracks looked fresh, as though they had been made not long ago. He rested his arms on the top rail and studied them carefully. It was unusual to see such tracks near the ranch without anyone knowing about it. Most travelers kept to the main trail, and strangers rarely wandered this close without reason. For a moment he considered calling for one of the other workers. But the ranch was still quiet, and he did not want to wake everyone over something that might be nothing. He climbed over the fence and walked slowly toward the tracks. The ground was dry and dusty, and each step stirred a faint cloud around his boots. The air felt different out there, quieter somehow. Even the breeze seemed to have softened. Daniel followed the tracks at a careful pace. They led away from the ranch and toward a shallow ravine not far beyond the open field. The ravine was not deep, just a natural dip in the land where rainwater sometimes collected during storms. Now it lay mostly dry, lined with stones and patches of rough grass. As he walked, he noticed the tracks becoming less steady, as if the person who made them had been tired or injured. His sense of curiosity grew stronger, mixed with a cautious concern. He paused at the edge of the ravine and looked down. The light had grown brighter, revealing more of the ground below. For a moment he saw nothing but rocks and shadows. Then he noticed a shape near the base of a large stone. It was still and partly hidden by the uneven terrain. Daniel's heart gave a small, uncertain beat. He took a slow breath and stepped down into the ravine. The air felt cooler there. The ground was uneven, and he moved carefully to avoid slipping. As he drew closer to the shape, he realized it was a person lying against the rock. The figure was motionless at first, and a wave of concern passed through him. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle whoever it was. When he came within a few steps, he saw that it was a woman. She looked exhausted and worn from travel. Dust covered her clothing, and her breathing seemed shallow but steady. Her eyes were closed at first, but as Daniel knelt nearby, she stirred slightly. He kept his hands visible and spoke softly, not knowing if she would understand his words. The woman opened her eyes, and for a moment they met his with a mixture of caution and fatigue. There was a quiet strength in her expression despite her condition. Daniel reached for his canteen and held it out. He did not move too quickly. He waited, giving her time to see that he meant no harm. After a moment, she accepted the water and took a small drink. The simple act eased some of the tension between them. Breath. He could see that she was too weak to stand without help. The tracks he had followed made sense now. He sat back on his heels and thought about what to do next. Leaving her there was not an option. The land could be harsh, and she clearly needed care, yet bringing her back to the ranch might raise questions and concerns among the others. He felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. The morning that had begun so quietly now felt very different. Breathe. He looked toward the ranch in the distance. The buildings were small against the wide land, touched by the growing light of day. It would not be long before the others woke and began their work. Daniel knew he had to act before too much time passed. He turned back to the woman and spoke gently again, using simple words and gestures to show that he wanted to help. She watched him carefully, as if measuring his intentions, but after a moment, she gave a slight nod. It was not a full sign of trust, but it was enough. Daniel moved slowly, careful not to cause her pain, and helped her sit up. He could feel how weak she was. The journey she had taken must have been long and difficult. He offered his support, letting her lean on him as she tried to stand. It was clear she could not walk far. He took another breath and made his choice. With steady care, he lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but he still moved cautiously over the uneven ground. Each step out of the ravine felt heavier with responsibility. The sun was rising higher now, spreading warm light across the land. The quiet morning had shifted into something else entirely. As he climbed back toward the ranch, Daniel felt a mixture of concern and determination. He did not know what would happen when the others saw them. He did not know what story the woman carried with her or what challenges might follow. All he knew was that he could not leave her behind. The simple act of stepping out to unloop the reins had led him here, carrying someone who needed help across the open land. The ranch grew closer with each step. Smoke began to rise from the chimney of the main house, a sign that the day's work was beginning. The peaceful routine he had expected was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Yet beneath that uncertainty was a quiet sense that this moment mattered. The land was wide and often lonely, but sometimes it brought people together in ways no one could predict. Daniel adjusted his grip and continued walking. The morning light stretched across the fields, and the sound of distant movement from the ranch reached his ears. Whatever waited ahead, he would face it when he arrived. For now, he kept his focus on each careful step, carrying the woman toward safety as the day fully began. Daniel reached the edge of the ranch yard just as the sun rose fully over the horizon. The warm light spread across the wooden fences and the dusty ground. turning everything a soft shade of gold. He walked slowly, careful not to stumble while carrying the woman in his arms. Each step felt longer than usual. He could already see movement near the barn. One of the early workers stepped outside, stretching and rubbing his eyes. When the man noticed Daniel approaching, his posture changed at once. At first, the worker only saw Daniel returning from the open land. Then he realized Daniel was not alone. He straightened and took a few steps forward, confusion clear on his face. Daniel gave a small nod as he came closer. He did not stop walking. The worker opened his mouth as if to ask a question, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. It was not a sight anyone expected to see so early in the morning. By the time Daniel reached the barn, 2 more workers had come outside. They looked from him to the woman he carried and back again. Their faces showed surprise and worry by it. No one spoke at first. The morning air felt tense, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Daniel shifted his grip slightly and spoke in a calm voice. He told them he had found her near the ravine, alone and in need of help. His words were simple and direct. He did not try to explain more than he knew. One of the workers stepped forward, glancing at the woman with caution. She looked tired but aware, her eyes moving slowly as she took in her surroundings. Daniel could feel that she was alert despite her weakness. He kept his tone steady and said that she needed rest and water. The workers exchanged looks. They were unsure what to do. The ranch had always been a place of routine and order. This moment did not fit into that routine. Pause. The oldest worker among them spoke quietly. He said they should bring her inside. At least, for now. Leaving her outside in the sun would not help anyone. Daniel nodded in agreement. He carried her toward an empty storage room near the side of the main house. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a wooden chair. It was usually used for supplies, but it would serve for the moment. Daniel stepped inside and lowered her carefully onto the bed. She moved slowly, wincing slightly as she settled.
He set his canteen nearby and stepped back to give her space.
One of the workers brought a small bowl of water and a cloth. The woman watched them closely, still cautious, but she did not pull away. The air in the room felt heavy with uncertainty, yet there was also a quiet sense of concern shared by everyone present. As the morning continued, the rest of the ranch began to wake. The ranch owner soon heard about what had happened and came to see for himself. He was a thoughtful man, not quick to anger, but careful in his decisions. He stood in the doorway and looked at the woman resting on the bed. Then he looked at Daniel. He asked what had happened, and Daniel explained the discovery in the ravine and the condition she had been in. He spoke plainly, without adding anything extra. The owner listened in silence. After a moment, the owner nodded slowly. He said they would allow her to stay for now until she regained strength. He made it clear that they would watch the situation carefully. The ranch was far from town and news traveled slowly. They would need to be cautious but also kind. His decision brought a small sense of relief to the room. No one wanted to turn away someone in need, yet they all understood the uncertainty of the moment. The woman rested through most of the morning. Daniel returned to his chores, though his thoughts kept drifting back to the small room. He moved through the usual tasks, feeding the horses, checking the fences, but everything felt slightly different. The land looked the same, yet the day carried a new weight. He wondered about her journey, how long she had traveled, and what had led her to the ravine. He also wondered how long she would need to stay. Later, he returned to the room with a small plate of food. He knocked lightly on the door before stepping inside. She was sitting up now, her back resting against the wall. She looked stronger than before, though still tired. He placed the plate on the chair and stepped back. He spoke slowly, using simple words and gentle gestures to show that the food was for her. She watched him for a moment, then reached for the plate and ate carefully, breaths. They did not share a common language, but small signs of understanding began to form. A nod, a glance, a calm tone. These things carried meaning even without shared words. Daniel felt a quiet sense of relief seeing her eat. It meant she had enough strength to recover. He stayed only a short time, not wanting to overwhelm her, then returned to his work. Outside, the ranch continued its daily rhythm. The workers talked quietly among themselves, wondering what might happen next. Some felt uneasy, unsure what her presence might bring. Others felt sympathy for her situation. The ranch owner kept a steady watch, making sure everyone stayed calm and focused on their tasks. He trusted Daniel's judgment, but knew they would need to think carefully about the days ahead. As the afternoon sun rose higher, the land grew warm and still. Dust drifted along the paths, and the sound of tools and footsteps filled the yard, perhaps. Daniel found himself glancing toward the small room more often than he expected. He felt responsible in a way he had not before.
Bringing her back had been the right choice, but it also meant facing whatever came next. In the late afternoon, he checked on her again.
She was standing near the window now, looking out at the wide fields. The light touched her face, and for a moment she looked less weary. She noticed him at the door and gave a small nod. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried a quiet sense of thanks. Daniel nodded back. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the land beyond the fence. He tried to ask her name, pointing gently to himself and saying his own. She listened, then spoke a word in return for it. It was soft and unfamiliar to his ears, but he understood it was her name. He repeated it as best he could, breath. She gave a faint smile at his effort. That small exchange felt like the beginning of something important, even if neither of them knew what it might become. As evening approached, the ranch settled into a calmer pace. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the air cooled again. The day that had begun with an ordinary task had become something far from ordinary. Daniel stood outside for a moment, looking across the land. He thought about the tracks in the dust, the quiet ravine, and the choice he had made to help. None of it had been planned. Inside the small room, the woman rested again, her breathing steady. The ranch around her remained cautious, but watchful. No one knew what the coming days would bring. There were still many questions and few answers. Yet the simple acts of kindness shown that day had created a fragile sense of trust. Night slowly fell over the ranch. Stars appeared one by one in the dark sky. The land grew quiet again, much like it had been at the start of the morning. But for Daniel and everyone there, the quiet felt different now. Something had changed. A single moment by the ravine had set new events into motion. And as the ranch prepared for another night, it carried the feeling that this unexpected meeting was only the beginning of a longer story. The next morning arrived slowly, with a soft light spreading across the ranch yard. The sky was clear again, and the land looked calm and wide, just as it always did. Yet the mood among the workers felt different. The usual sounds of buckets, footsteps, and quiet morning talk carried a hint of tension. Everyone knew that the ranch now held a guest whose presence had changed the rhythm of their days' breaths. Daniel rose early, as he always did, but his thoughts were not as steady as usual. He stepped outside and paused for a moment, looking toward the small room near the side of the main house. A faint line of smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, and the smell of coffee drifted across the yard. The ranch was waking up, but there was a sense that people were watching and waiting to see what would happen next. He walked toward the stable and began his morning work. The horses seemed calmer than the day before. The same restless horse that had first drawn his attention now stood quietly, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. Daniel brushed its coat and checked the water troughs. Perhaps. His hands moved through the familiar tasks, but his mind kept returning to the woman resting inside. He wondered how she had slept and whether she felt safe among strangers. After finishing the first round of chores, he carried a small bucket of water and a piece of bread toward the room. He knocked lightly before stepping inside. The woman was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. The early sunlight reached through the window and touched the floor near her feet. She looked stronger than the day before, though still tired. When she saw Daniel, she gave a small nod. He set the water and bread on the chair and stepped back to give her space. She accepted the food with quiet care. Breaths. They still did not share many words, but their gestures had begun to carry meaning. He pointed to the yard outside and then back to the room, as if to show that she could rest here as long as she needed. She listened and nodded slowly, understanding enough to feel at ease. Outside, the other workers were gathering near the barn. Some spoke quietly among themselves, their voices low but serious. They were not unkind people, but they were unsure how to feel. The ranch was far from town, and any unexpected situation could bring worry. A few of them wondered aloud what might happen if travelers or traders passed by and saw the woman there. Breaths said it was right to help someone in need, no matter where they came from.
The ranch owner joined them after a short while.
He listened to their concerns with a calm expression. He reminded them that the woman was injured and alone, and that for now she needed rest more than anything else. He told them to continue their work and not let fear grow from uncertainty. His voice was steady, and it helped ease some of the tension. Still, the mood remained cautious. Throughout the morning, the ranch moved through its usual routine. Horses were saddled, fences were checked, and supplies were sorted. Yet small glances kept turning toward the main house. The woman's presence was felt even when she was out of sight. Daniel noticed the way people spoke more quietly than usual. Breaths. He also noticed that no one had asked him directly why he chose to bring her back. They seemed to understand his decision, even if they were unsure about the future. Later in the day, the woman stepped outside for the first time since arriving. The sunlight touched her face, and she blinked slightly at the brightness. She stood near the doorway, looking out at the wide fields and the distant hills. The open land must have felt both familiar and strange to her. Daniel saw her from across the yard and walked over slowly, not wanting to startle her. He gave a small gesture toward the bench near the wall, offering her a place to sit. Psst. She accepted and moved carefully, still regaining her strength. A few workers watched from a distance. Their expressions were not hostile, just uncertain. They did not know how to speak to her or what to say. The quiet between them stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was simply new. Daniel tried to communicate in simple ways. He pointed to himself and repeated his name, Bert. Then he pointed to her gently, inviting her to share hers again. She spoke it softly.
He repeated it as best he could. She gave a faint smile, showing appreciation for the effort.
It was a small moment, but it eased some of the distance between them. As the hours passed, she began to help with small tasks near the house. Breaths. Nothing heavy or difficult, just simple actions like folding cloth or carrying light items. She moved slowly but with care, as if she wanted to show she was not a burden. The ranch owner noticed and nodded quietly. He appreciated her effort, even though he knew she still needed rest. Some of the workers began to see her differently as they watched her work. They saw not a stranger, but a person trying to recover and find balance. One of them offered a cup of warm tea. Another placed a small stool near the doorway so she could sit comfortably. These gestures were small, but they showed that fear was slowly giving way to understanding. Still, questions remained. No one knew where she had come from or where she was going. News traveled slowly across the land, and it was difficult to know what lay beyond the horizon. Grasp. Daniel wondered if she had family or friends somewhere far away. He wondered if she planned to continue traveling once she was strong enough. Narration. He did not ask directly. Some questions needed time before they could be answered. In the late afternoon, a wagon passed along the distant road. It was far enough away that the people inside could not see the ranch clearly, but the sight reminded everyone how connected the world could be. Travelers carried news and stories from one place to another. If word spread about the ranch taking in a stranger, it might bring curiosity or concern. The ranch owner watched the wagon until it disappeared, then returned to his work with a thoughtful expression. As evening approached, the air cooled again. The sky turned soft shades of orange and purple. The woman sat near the doorway, looking out across the land. Daniel stood nearby, leaning lightly against the wall. They shared the quiet moment without speaking. The ranch around them moved through its evening tasks, and the sounds of the day slowly faded. Dinner was simple but warm. The workers gathered around a long table, and after a moment of hesitation, a place was set for the woman as well. She joined them quietly. The meal passed with few words, but there was no tension, only a careful awareness that something new had entered their lives. Pretend. When the meal ended, she gave a small nod of thanks and returned to the room to rest. Night settled over the ranch once more. Stars filled the sky, bright and steady. The land felt peaceful again, though the sense of change remained. Daniel stood outside for a moment before heading to the bunkhouse. He thought about how quickly a single morning had turned into days of uncertainty and quiet adjustment. He did not know what would happen next, but he felt certain that helping her had been the right choice. Inside the small room, the woman lay resting, her breathing calm and even. She was no longer alone in the ravine. Narration. The ranch had become a temporary place of safety, though no one knew for how long. Outside, the night wind moved gently across the fields, carrying the soft sounds of the land. The ranch had always been a place of routine and steady work. Now it was also a place of watchful patience. But each day brought small changes and new understanding. The people there were learning that trust did not appear all at once. It grew slowly, through simple acts and quiet moments. As the night deepened, the ranch grew still. The stars shone above and the wide land stretched out in every direction. Somewhere beyond the hills lay the paths that had brought the woman there, and the paths that might lead her forward. For now, the ranch held its quiet balance, waiting to see what the coming days would bring. The days that followed moved at a steady but thoughtful pace. The ranch returned to its usual rhythm on the surface, yet everyone felt the quiet change that had settled over the place. Morning chores began with the same sounds of boots on dust, buckets clinking, and horses shifting in their stalls. Still, there was now a sense of shared awareness among the people. They were learning how to live with something unexpected in their midst. The woman grew stronger with each passing day. She walked more easily, and the tired look in her eyes began to fade. She spent time near the main house, helping with small tasks that did not require much strength. At first she stayed close to the doorway, as if unsure how far she should go, but slowly she began to move more freely around the yard. Her steps were careful, yet there was a steady confidence in the way she carried herself. Daniel watched this change with quiet relief, so he had worried about how long her recovery might take and whether the ranch would feel like a safe place for her. Now he could see that she was finding her footing, both in body and in spirit. He continued to speak with her in simple words and gestures. They found ways to communicate through shared actions, pointing, nodding, and showing by example. Sometimes they laughed softly at their attempts to understand each other. These moments felt light and genuine. One afternoon, Daniel was repairing a section of fence near the edge of the yard. The sun was warm, and the air carried the smell of dry grass. He noticed her standing nearby, watching him work. She held a small coil of rope in her hands, as if ready to help. He gave a friendly nod and motion for her to come closer. She stepped forward and handed him the rope when he needed it. They worked in quiet cooperation, each understanding the other without many words. The other workers began to notice these small moments of teamwork. Breath. At first, they had kept their distance, unsure of how to act. But as the days passed, their caution softened. They saw her willingness to help and her respectful way of moving through the ranch. One of the younger workers showed her how to gather eggs from the small coop behind the barn. Another pointed out where fresh water was kept. She listened carefully and followed their guidance with patience. There were still times when uncertainty lingered.
Some of the workers wondered what would happen when she was fully recovered.
Would she stay for a while longer or would she continue on her journey? The ranch owner thought about this often. He wanted to offer kindness but also needed to think about the safety and stability of the ranch. He watched the growing sense of understanding among everyone and felt quietly hopeful that a good path would reveal itself.
In the evenings, the ranch often grew calm after the day's work was done.
The sky would turn soft shades of gold and pink, and the breeze would carry the cool touch of night. During one such evening, the woman sat near the edge of the yard, looking out at the open land. Daniel joined her after finishing his chores. They sat on a low wooden bench, watching the light fade across the fields. He pointed toward the distant hills and then toward her, as if asking where she had come from. She followed his gesture and looked toward the horizon. After a moment, she spoke quietly and pointed in a direction far beyond what they could see. Her expression held a mix of memory and longing. Though he did not understand her words, he understood the feeling behind them. She was thinking of home, of people and places that mattered to her. Daniel nodded slowly. He did not press for details. Instead, he placed his hand lightly over his chest and then pointed toward the ranch as if to say, she was welcome here for as long as she needed.
She watched him for a moment and then gave a small, grateful smile.
It was a simple exchange, but it carried a sense of trust that had grown over time. As the days turned into weeks, the ranch began to feel like a shared space rather than a place divided by uncertainty. The workers grew more comfortable speaking near her, even if they did not share a common language. They included her in small daily routines. She learned where tools were kept, how to help prepare simple meals, and how to care for the animals in gentle ways. In return, she showed them quiet respect and steady effort. One morning she brought a bundle of wild plants she had gathered near the edge of the land. She showed them to the ranch cook, pointing and explaining in her own words how they could be used. The cook listened with interest and tried to follow along. Together, they prepared a simple dish that everyone later shared. It was a small but meaningful moment of exchange. The workers realized that she carried knowledge and skills of her own. Daniel noticed how these shared moments changed the mood of the ranch. Laughter came more easily now. Conversations flowed without the earlier tension. The ranch owner watched it all with a thoughtful expression. He saw that kindness had not brought trouble as some had feared. Instead, it had brought a quiet sense of connection. Still, the question of her future remained. One evening, the ranch owner called Daniel aside. They stood near the fence, looking out at the land. The owner spoke in a calm voice. He said they would soon need to ask what she wished to do next. If she wanted to continue traveling, they would help her prepare. If she needed more time, they would consider that as well. Daniel nodded, understanding the balance they needed to find narration. Later that night, Daniel sat near the doorway of the small room where she had first rested. She joined him, and they shared a quiet moment under the stars. He tried to ask gently about her plans. He pointed to the open land, and then made a walking motion with his hand. She watched his gestures and seemed to understand. She looked thoughtful, as if weighing her options. After a pause, she pointed again toward the distant hills and spoke softly. Then she placed her hand over her heart and nodded. Daniel sensed that she hoped to continue her journey someday, to find the place and people she had left behind. Yet he also sensed that she was not in a hurry. She wanted to leave with strength and confidence, not in weakness. He nodded in return, showing that he understood. He pointed to the ranch and then made a gesture of support, as if to say they would help when the time came. She gave a quiet smile, one that carried both gratitude and determination. The stars above them shone brightly, and the night felt calm and full of promise. As the days continued, the ranch moved forward with a new sense of unity. The woman was no longer seen as a stranger, but as someone who had shared in their work and daily life. Trust had grown slowly, built through patience and simple acts of kindness.
The workers no longer spoke in hushed voices about her presence.
Instead, they included her in their routine with natural ease. Daniel often thought back to the morning when he had first followed the tracks into the ravine. That moment felt distant now, yet its impact remained. What had begun as a simple chore had led to a connection none of them had expected. The ranch, once defined only by routine and work, now carried a story of understanding and shared humanity. Even as they prepared for the day when she might leave, there was no sadness in the air. Instead, there was a quiet sense of purpose. They knew that helping her had changed them in small but lasting ways. It had shown them that the land, wide and often lonely, could also bring people together when they least expected it. On a warm evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft and glowing, the ranch stood peaceful and steady. The woman walked slowly along the fence line, looking out across the fields. Daniel watched from a short distance, feeling a sense of calm. He knew that whatever came next, they had built something meaningful through patience and kindness. The breeze moved gently across the land, carrying the scent of grass and the promise of tomorrow. The ranch continued its quiet life, but it was no longer quite the same as before. It had become a place where strangers could become friends, and where simple acts could shape the path of many lives. The days moved forward with a calm and steady rhythm, yet everyone at the ranch could feel that a change was coming. The woman had grown strong again. Apache walked with confidence, worked with care, and carried herself with quiet purpose. The ranch no longer felt like a place where she was only resting. It had become a place where she had shared time, effort, and trust with the people around her. Still, the wide land beyond the fences seemed to call to her more with each passing day. One morning the sky was clear and bright. The air felt fresh, and the breeze carried the gentle sound of leaves moving along the far trees. Daniel stood near the stable, brushing one of the horses. He noticed her standing by the fence, looking out toward the distant hills. Her expression was thoughtful, as if she were measuring the distance in her mind.
He had seen that look before.
It was the look of someone thinking about the road ahead. He walked over slowly and stood beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at the open land together. But then she turned slightly and pointed toward the horizon. She spoke softly, using the few shared words they both understood and a few gestures to fill in the rest. It was clear that she wished to continue her journey soon. She was grateful for the time she had spent there, but she knew she needed to move forward. Bray. Daniel listened carefully. He nodded to show that he understood. He felt a mix of emotions, relief that she was strong enough to travel, and a quiet sadness that she would soon leave. The ranch had grown used to her presence. Her steady help, her quiet smiles, and her calm way of moving through the day had become part of their routine. Still, he knew that everyone's path led onward at some point. Later that day, Daniel spoke with the ranch owner. They stood near the main house, where the sun cast long shadows across the ground. The owner listened as Daniel explained her wish to leave. He nodded slowly. He had expected this moment to come. He said they would help her prepare for the journey. They would gather supplies and ensure she had what she needed to travel safely. The decision felt right to both of them. Brands.
The workers soon learned about her plan. They reacted with quiet understanding.
Some offered small items that might help. Dried food, a water pouch, a blanket. Each gift was given with simple kindness. No one made a big display of it. They just wanted her to have what she needed. She accepted these items with gratitude, placing a hand over her heart and nodding to each person. In the days that followed, preparations were made. Daniel checked the paths that led toward the trading routes. He wanted to guide her for part of the way, at least until she reached a place where travelers often passed. The ranch owner agreed that this would be wise. The land was wide, and the early part of the journey could be lonely. A little company would make it easier. On the evening before her departure, the ranch gathered for a simple meal. The sky turned soft shades of orange and purple as the sun lowered behind the hills. A long table was set outside, and everyone took a seat. Doors. The meal was warm and shared without many words. There was a feeling of quiet respect among them. They had come to know one another through shared work and patience. Now they were sharing a moment of farewell. Breaths. After the meal, the stars began to appear. The night air felt cool and calm. The woman stood near the edge of the yard, looking up at the sky. Daniel walked over and stood beside her. They had shared many silent moments like this before. This one felt different because it carried a sense of closure and new beginnings at the same time. He pointed toward the path they would take in the morning. She nodded and smiled faintly. Then she placed her hand over her heart and gestured toward the ranch. It was her way of saying thank you. He returned the gesture, showing that he was glad she had come into their lives. They stood there for a while, letting the quiet of the night settle around them. Morning came gently. The sun rose over the land, casting a golden light across the fields and fences. The ranch stirred awake, but there was a calm stillness in the air.
Daniel saddled a horse and prepared a small pack with supplies.
The others gathered near the gate, offering quiet nods and simple words of farewell. No one wanted to make the moment heavy.
They knew this was part of the journey for all of them. She stepped forward, ready to go.
Her posture was strong and steady. The days of rest had restored her, and the time spent at the ranch had given her a sense of support. She looked at each person, offering a nod or a small smile. When she reached Daniel, they shared a brief but meaningful moment of eye contact. Breaths. No words were needed. The understanding between them was clear. They set out together, moving along the path that led away from the ranch. The land stretched wide and open around them. The air felt fresh and the sky was bright. They walked at a steady pace, the sound of their steps soft against the earth. For a while they spoke only through gestures and occasional simple words. The journey felt peaceful. As they reached a rise in the land, the ranch grew smaller behind them. The buildings looked like small shapes against the horizon. Daniel paused and turned to look back. He felt a quiet sense of gratitude for how things had unfolded. What had begun as an ordinary morning had become a story of kindness and understanding. They continued walking until they reached a point where the path joined a more traveled route. In the distance, faint tracks showed where wagons and riders often passed. Daniel stopped there and turned to her.
Ah!
He pointed ahead, showing that the path would lead her toward places where she might find news or guidance. She looked ahead, then back at him. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then she stepped forward and gave him a brief, respectful embrace. It was a simple gesture, but it carried deep meaning. She stepped back, nodded once more, and began walking along the path. Her steps were steady and sure. Daniel watched until she became a small figure in the distance, then finally disappeared beyond the rise. Around. He stood there for a while, feeling the quiet of the open land. The breeze moved gently across the fields, and the sky stretched wide above him. Breath. He felt both a sense of completion and a sense of hope. The ranch would return to its usual routine, but it would never feel exactly the same as before. The memory of her presence and the lessons learned during her stay would remain. Daniel turned and began walking back toward the ranch. Each step felt calm and certain. He knew that simple acts of kindness could shape the course of lives in ways no one could predict. The land around him was the same as always, wide, quiet, and full of possibility. When he reached the ranch, the others were already moving through their morning tasks. They looked up as he approached and understood without needing many words. The day went on as usual, yet there was a shared sense that something meaningful had taken place. They had helped someone in need, and, in doing so, had grown a little closer to one another. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the ranch settled back into its steady rhythm. The fences stood strong, the horses moved calmly, and the field stretched out under the bright light. Life continued, as it always did, but now it carried the memory of a time when a simple morning task led to an unexpected meeting, and that meeting led to a story of trust, patience, and quiet understanding.